She has no idea what she's doing with that money. She never did. My brother didn't even lower his voice when he said it. He was standing right there in the hallway outside the attorney's conference room, loud enough for the paralegal to hear, loud enough for our aunt to nod along like she'd been waiting years, for someone to finally say it out loud. I was 3 feet away. He knew I could hear him. That was the point. I didn't turn around. I walked to my chair, sat down, smoothed my jacket, and checked my phone. 11 minutes before the reading of my mother's will would begin. 11 minutes before my brother's entire plan would start to unravel, in front of the one person he'd forgotten to account for. Himself. Have you ever been in a room where everyone has already decided who you are before you open your mouth? Drop a yes in the comments. I want to know how many of us have sat in that chair. My brother's name is Derek. He is 41 years old, has a firm handshake, a good haircut, and has been telling people I'm emotionally unstable since the week I filed for divorce 2 years ago. He's charming in the way that people who need something from you are always charming. He remembered birthdays. He called aunts on holidays. He showed up. And while he was showing up, smiling, pouring wine, being the dependable firstborn son, he was also slowly, methodically, making sure everyone in our family believed that I, Maya, 32 years old, the younger sister who left her marriage and moved into a one-bedroom apartment and couldn't hold her life together, should not be trusted with anything important. He'd been laying that groundwork for 2 years. I'd been watching him do it for 22 months, and I'd been building something while I watched. The conference room at Hargrove and Wills smelled like old paper and central air conditioning, the kind of room where serious things happen and nobody raises their voice. Our mother's attorney, a quiet man named Mr. Tens, Holt, who wore reading glasses on a chain around his neck, sat at the head of the table. To his right, Derek. To Derek's right, his wife Cheryl, who had the specific posture of someone who expects to be handed something. On my side of the table, just me. No husband, no buffer. Exactly the image Derek had spent 2 years constructing. The struggling little sister, alone, fragile, a liability. Our Aunt Patricia sat in the corner on a chair that had been pulled from the waiting room. She wasn't a beneficiary. She was there because Derek had called her. I understood that the moment I saw her, she was the audience. She was the witness he needed for whatever performance was coming. Mr. Holt cleared his throat and opened the folder. I folded my hands on the table and waited. Derek's version of events, the version he had told everyone, was this. After our mother was diagnosed 18 months ago, I had been too consumed by my own personal drama, the divorce, the apartment, the breakdown he liked to reference without ever specifying what it actually meant to be present. He had been there. He had driven her to appointments. He had handled the finances. He had managed the caregivers, the medications, the paperwork. He had been, in his own words, the one who showed up. And so it was only natural, only fair, only logical, that the estate, the house in Westfield, the investment accounts, the life insurance, all of it should reflect that reality. He had even, in the month before my mother passed, taken her to a different attorney, one she had never used before, to update certain documents. I knew about that visit. I had known about it for 16 months. I just hadn't said anything. Mr. Holt began reading. The language was formal and slow. Cheryl had a legal pad. She was already uncapping her pen. Then Mr. Holt paused. He looked up over his reading glasses and said, very calmly, before I continue, I need to note that this office received a secondary filing 3 weeks ago pertaining to this estate. I'll be addressing both documents today. Derek's pen stopped moving. It was almost imperceptible. Just a half-second freeze, the kind your body does when something unexpected walks in through a door you thought was locked. I didn't look at him. I looked at my hands. I had trained myself for months to look at my hands in moments like this, to stay still, to breathe, to give nothing away. In psychology, there is a concept called the gray rock method. The idea is simple. When someone is trying to provoke an emotional reaction from you to destabilize you, to get ammunition, to prove that you're volatile and irrational, you become a gray rock. Flat, uninteresting. You give them nothing to work with. You don't argue. You don't defend yourself. You don't cry. You sit there and you let them perform for an empty theater. I had been a gray rock for 22 months. Not because I was passive, not because I didn't know what was happening, but because I was documenting. Derek leaned over to Cheryl and whispered something. She wrote something on her legal pad and underlined it. Aunt Patricia shifted in her corner chair. The room had changed temperature slightly, and everyone could feel it, except they didn't know why yet. Mr. Holt continued reading. My mother's original will, the one she had written 4 years ago with Mr. Holt's office, was straightforward. The house split equally. The investment accounts split equally. The personal items divided by a list she had made herself, in her own handwriting, that she had kept in a fireproof box in her bedroom closet. Equal, balanced, the way she had always tried to be. Then Mr. Holt stopped again. The secondary document, he said, setting the original pages to the side, is a filing submitted by Miss Maya regarding a power of attorney executed 14 months ago. Specifically, she is contesting the validity of the document on the grounds of undue influence and cognitive impairment at the time of signing. Derek set his pen down. He turned to look at me for the first time since we'd sat down. His expression was the one he used when he was recalibrating, when the situation wasn't going the script he had rehearsed. It wasn't anger yet. It was assessment. He was trying to read me, trying to find the crack. I looked back at him. My face was completely empty. Not cold, not angry, just still. A gray rock on a gray table. "This is absurd," Derek said. He turned to Mr. Holt. "She's contesting a document that our mother signed of her own free will. This is exactly the kind of irrational behavior I've been concerned about." And there it was, the pivot. He hadn't even waited 5 minutes. 40 seconds after being surprised, he had already rerouted the entire moment back to the story he'd been selling for 2 years. Maya is unstable. Maya is irrational. Maya cannot be trusted. Mr. Holt looked at me. "Miss Maya, would you like to respond?" I reached down to the bag beside my chair and placed a single manila folder on the table. "I would," I said, "but I'd like to start with a question for my brother, if that's all right." Mr. Holt nodded. I looked at Derek. "Do you remember the Tuesday in March, about 14 months ago? You called me in the morning. You said Mom was having a bad day and that you were handling everything and I didn't need to come." Derek's jaw moved slightly. "I don't remember every phone call." "That's okay," I said. "I do." I opened the folder. The first page was a phone record printout, a single highlighted line, the call from Derek's number to mine, 7:43 in the morning. Duration, 4 minutes and 12 seconds. The second page was a medical record, my mother's chart from her neurologist, dated that same Tuesday. Under the clinical notation for that appointment, patient exhibited significant disorientation during examination, unable to recall daughter's name. Advised family against any legal document execution during current cognitive state. The third page was the power of attorney document itself, dated that same Tuesday afternoon, signed at a notary office 6 miles from the neurologist's office, witnessed by 2 people. One of them was Cheryl. The room went very quiet. I want to explain something here because this is the part of the story people always ask about. They ask why. Why didn't I say something sooner? Why didn't I call an attorney the week I found out? Why did I let it sit for 16 months? And the answer is the same answer it always is when you've grown up in a family where the person hurting you is also the person everyone else loves. Because I needed it to be undeniable. If I had walked into that room 16 months ago waving a medical record and a phone log, Derek would have had an explanation. He always had explanations. He would have said the neurologist was being overly cautious. He would have said Mom had a good hour that afternoon, that she was lucid, that she specifically asked him to take her. He would have said I was manufacturing a crisis because of my divorce. And half the family would have believed him because he'd already spent months making sure they would. So I waited. I gathered. I built a case the way you build a case when you know the other side is better at talking than you are. You don't argue. You document. You let them keep moving, keep taking, keep adding to the record. You become uninteresting and invisible, and you watch. Every phone call Derek made to our mother during those 16 months, I had a record of. Every withdrawal from the joint account he had accessed via that power of attorney, I had a record of. Every time he called an aunt or a cousin and mentioned, casually, that he was worried about me, that I wasn't doing well, that he hoped I would get some help, I had records of those too. Not recordings. I want to be clear. Just notes. Dates, times, what was said to me afterward by people who thought they were being kind when they passed along his concern. 22 months of a paper trail. Quiet, invisible, boring, complete. Derek looked at the pages in front of Mr. Holt. He looked at them the way you look at something you thought you'd buried and are now watching get dug up. Those records could be falsified, he said. The neurologist is prepared to testify, I said. Her name is Dr. Christine Vance. She has been my mother's physician for 9 years. I spoke with her office last month. She was not surprised to hear from me. Cheryl stopped writing on her legal pad. The notary. Derek started. The notary was Gail Hutchins, licensed in this state for 11 years. She told me when I called her 8 months ago that she remembered the appointment. She said the woman who came in seemed confused and that she had expressed some hesitation about proceeding. She said my brother assured her that Mom had just come from a medical appointment and was tired, not confused. Gail signed because she gave him the benefit of the doubt. I paused. She doesn't feel good about that anymore. She also put it in writing. Derek stood up. Not all the way. Half stood, one hand on the table, the way people do when they want to loom without technically making a scene. You went and talked to the notary. You talked to the doctor. You've been running around behind my back building some kind of case against your own family. I've been protecting Mom's estate, I said, which is what she asked me to do. That stopped him. Mr. Holt looked at me over his glasses. Could you elaborate on that? I took a breath. This was the part I had rehearsed more than any other. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I needed to say it without my voice breaking. Because it was true and it was important and I was not going to let it land wrong. About 18 months ago, I said, before my mother's condition had progressed significantly, she called me. Not Derek. Me. She called me on a Wednesday evening and she asked me to come over. And when I got there, she was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and she told me she was scared. Not of dying. She was okay about dying. She was scared of what would happen to what she'd spent her life building. She said she had noticed things. Money moved around in ways she didn't remember authorizing. Paperwork she didn't remember signing. She said she felt like the ground under her was shifting, and she didn't know if she could trust her own memory anymore. I stopped, steadied myself. She asked me to watch. She said she couldn't do it herself anymore, but she trusted me to do it for her, and she asked me not to tell Derek she'd called. Aunt Patricia had her hand over her mouth. Derek sat back down. That's a very convenient story, he said, but his voice had changed. The confidence was still there, but there was something underneath it now, something effortful. It would be, I said, if I didn't have the voicemail she left me the following morning, summarizing everything she'd told me the night before. She said she wanted there to be a record. She was an accountant for 31 years. She knew how records worked. I slid the final page of the folder across the table to Mr. Holt. I had it transcribed and notarized. The original audio file has already been submitted to the probate court along with the contest filing. The room was completely silent. Not the silence of shock. The silence of a conclusion arriving. Derek's mouth moved once without producing a word. Then he turned to Cheryl. She was looking at her legal pad. Then he turned to look at Aunt Patricia in the corner. She was looking at the table. There was no one left to perform for. I want to be honest about something. There was no part of me that enjoyed this. I want to be clear about that because I know how these stories can sound. Like revenge. Like winning. And I understand why people hear it that way. Because I've needed that version of the story to exist too. Late at night when I was sitting alone in my apartment wondering if I was wrong. If I was paranoid. If I was the thing he had been saying I was. But sitting in that room, watching my brother's face, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. I felt the specific exhaustion of someone who has been holding something heavy for a very long time and has finally set it down. That's all. Just tired. And then, slowly, something lighter. Derek tried one more thing. That's who he is. He doesn't surrender cleanly. He said, even if there's a question about the POA, the transfers from the account were for household expenses, caregiving costs. You can't prove otherwise. The caregiving agency is Brightview Home Care, I said. I called them. They confirmed the billing amount for the 18 months my mother used their services. I have the invoices. The total paid to Brightview from Mom's account was consistent with their billing records. I looked at him. The discrepancy between what was withdrawn and what was paid to Brightview is approximately $43,000 over 14 months. I have a spreadsheet. It's also been filed. Cheryl put down her pen. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It was the gesture of someone who has just done a quiet calculation and decided they want no further part of something. Mr. Holt removed his reading glasses and set them on the table. He looked at Derek in a way that contained no warmth and no judgment, just fact. Given the documentation presented and the court filing already in progress, he said, I'm not in a position to proceed with distribution today. This matter will need to go before a probate judge. However, I will note for the record that the contest appears to have substantive merit. He looked at Derek. I would strongly advise you to consult with your own counsel before taking any further action regarding the estate accounts. Derek left before I did. He didn't say anything to me on the way out. Cheryl followed him, her legal pad tucked under her arm, the page she'd been writing on still visible, nothing on it but a single underlined word I couldn't read from where I was sitting. Aunt Patricia lingered. She stood by the door for a moment, and I thought she was going to say something, and I waited for it. She opened her mouth once, and then closed it. And then she left too. I sat alone in the conference room for a few minutes after everyone had gone. Mr. Holt had stepped out to make a call. The room smelled like paper and cold air and something that had recently shifted. I thought about my mother at her kitchen table with her cup of tea. I thought about the steadiness in her voice when she'd said she trusted me to watch. I thought about how many times in the 18 months that followed I had almost called Derek and said, "I know what you're doing, just stop, let's not do this." How many times I had typed out the message and deleted it. How many times I had chosen the harder, quieter path because I understood, somewhere deep in the part of me that is most like her, that some things can only be resolved completely or not at all. She was right about that. She was right about most things. The probate case is still ongoing. I'm not going to pretend it's over, because it isn't. There are attorneys and court dates and a process that moves slowly and without sentiment. But the POA has been suspended pending review. The estate accounts have been frozen. And Derek, for the first time in 2 years, does not have a story that holds. What I want you to take from this is not the legal strategy. I'm not a lawyer. What I did was specific to my situation, and I had help from people who knew what they were doing, and I would not recommend to anyone that they simply allow financial harm to accumulate in silence without guidance. Get an attorney. Document everything. Don't do it alone. What I want you to take from this is something else. There is a kind of person who relies on your reaction, who needs you to be loud, to be messy, to confirm the story they've been telling about you. They are counting on you to perform your own undoing. They have planned for your anger. They have not planned for your patience. For 22 months, I was boring. I was flat. I was a gray rock in a gray room, and I let my brother talk and talk and talk until he had talked himself into a corner. He built entirely with his own words. The strongest move is sometimes the quietest one. Not because silence is passive, but because silence, when it is full of something full of records and dates and phone calls and notarized transcriptions and a spreadsheet $43,000 long, is the loudest thing in any room. I walked out of Hargrove and Wills into an afternoon that smelled like cut grass and the beginning of something. I sat in my car for a while. Then I called the one friend who had known everything from the start, who had sat with me in my one-bedroom apartment on the bad nights and told me to keep going, and I said, "It started today." And she said, "I know. Your mom knew too." I didn't cry until then, and then I cried for a long time, and then I drove home. Keep going. Document everything. And remember that the person who underestimates you is always the one who loses.